Chair.
Moana Mackie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm happy to take a call on Part 3, which amends the Employment Relations Act 2000, a domestic piece of legislation. The Labour Party, Mr. Chair, has a proud history of fighting for independent foreign policy. I think it's a sad day that in the House today we're now having to fight for independent domestic policy. And I think this is a huge shift, amending the Employment Relations Act because a multinational foreign company pressured the government to do so is a step that we on this side of the House don't believe was necessary and don't believe should have been taken. And Mr. Chair, I had an email from a colleague in an overseas parliament overnight who said to me, this cannot be true. Someone told me you're amending your Employment Relations Act 2000 because a foreign company asked you to and put pressure on it. And I said that wouldn't happen in a modern, developed country like New Zealand. And I had to go back to him. He's a member of Parliament in the Westminster Parliament in the UK, and say to him, it is true. It is true. A foreign company came down and said, we want you to amend the Employment Relations Act 2000 because we don't like it. And our government rolled over and said, yes, we'll do that. And they didn't have to. Had they negotiated this better, we wouldn't be here amending the Employment Relations Act. Had our government not gone out and tried to whip up anti-union sentiment because they saw an opportunity to amend the Employment Relations Act 2000 and thought, here's a go, we can have a whack at the unions and we can change some employment law that we don't like. Had they not done that, had they actually said, pointed out the reality, which was this had been settled, there was no danger, there was no more kind of industrial action being threatened. It was a peaceful industrial relations environment. Emails that have been released have shown that the Employment Relations Act didn't need to be amended in order to fix that. We would have been in a much stronger negotiating position. We wouldn't have had to have been here in urgency passing law amending the Employment Relations Act 2000 at the behest of an overseas corporation. We may not have had to pay as much subsidy either. So the government had a choice. Because they wanted to amend the Employment Relations Act, they decided that they would whip up some frenzy which wasn't justified, and they know it wasn't justified because this was all resolved a long time ago. And since the court case that we're discussing, we've made huge numbers of movies in New Zealand and haven't had a single problem that would suggest we need to amend the Employment Relations Act 2000 to fix. Huge a number of movies, absolutely no problem. And the members of the government know this was sorted. So we're here because our government decided to take an opportunity and decided to because there were protests of tens of thousands of people last week against some of their other employment relations changes and they were feeling the pressure, thought, well, let's have a whack at the unions, let's amend a bit of law we don't like anyway, the Employment Relations Act 2000, and who cares? Who cares if that means that we end up having to be in a position where we pay higher subsidies offshore and also have parliaments around the world looking at us saying, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? You are changing laws in New Zealand because Warner Brothers asked the New Zealand Parliament to do so. Because, of course, everyone in this House is pleased that this movie is going to be made here. We don't believe the Employment Relations Act 2000 needed to be amended in order to do that. And if the government had handled this better, if Mr Brownlee himself had actually developed relationships with Warner Brothers like the previous government did and not come in at the 11th hour when the relationship had broken down and when everything was in a shambles, we wouldn't be here amending the Employment Relations Act 2000, Mr Chair. So let's be clear, this is opportunistic by the government, very opportunistic. They're not telling the whole story to the House in their speeches. Everyone is very, very pleased that this film is going to be made here. It's a shame that the price we had to pay was being seen as a parliament that no longer has independent domestic policy.
Dr.